Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Game Devs of Color Expo 2020. I'm the Purple Sharpie, but you can call me Sharpie if you're feeling especially independent today. And I am here with Tristan, the lead designer of the brand new independently made game, Don't Give Up. How are you doing today, Tristan?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic, fantastic to hear and see you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about this game, if you could, please?
Don't Give Up is a light RPG narrative adventure about a struggling game developer trying to pick up the pieces of his life. It takes place on a day where he's going to a party of all places and finds out that his emotions have become so repressed that they're starting to manifest in reality. And he becomes intertwined into this plot that's bigger than himself. Which will ultimately force him to figure out who he is and step into his own. It's got two storylines between two characters, some real-time combat, but the core focus on the game is really the narrative and telling a story about coming into your own.
That is a very interesting idea for a game, and I'm really excited to see even more about it. I believe we actually have a trailer that we can go ahead and show here. So why don't we go ahead and get that trailer footage ready? Let's watch. Amazing game. Super excited to see it. Currently available right now in PC, for PC on Steam. But I understand that it's coming to Switch later next year, early 2021, I believe. So let's talk about the concept behind this game. You have described Don't Give Up as a love letter to yourself. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I could really talk for a really long time about this, but ultimately, Don't Give Up was conceived where I was at a really low point and almost considering giving up game dev and giving up on myself, hence the name Don't Give Up. And I really just sort of started writing my emotions into this game. I didn't know if I would finish it. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. It was visually my least ambitious video game project, but it was really just an outlet for me. So I started writing about myself and making the game I wanted to make versus making a game that I thought would sell or do well or would go mainstream or viral.
I like it a lot because a lot of the motifs inside of the character, the main character of Tris, who would it be fair to say that that character was based upon you very heavily as well?
Very heavily, yes. Not completely, but a lot of the source material just comes from things I've either experienced or been feeling. And every scene in the game is at minimum written in a way that appropriately encompasses how I would respond in the given situation.
This scene right here we have actually with Triss communicating with a woman in the game, and we see just as he tries to communicate about something that he's very passionate about and very interested in, he's suddenly caught by surprise when she, you know, talks about anime and is able to relate in the same thing. So we get like this really hilarious and lovable motif for the protagonist coming out of a place where they're concerned about how they're going to appear to others, about being relatable, about not necessarily upsetting others while still trying to be true to themselves. And that something that you feel you really worked on making Tristan excel at inside of this game, as well as putting fragments of yourself in there?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, a lot of this stuff is very true to me. And a part of that scene is sort of inspired. Well, much of the game is sort of inspired when I first moved across the country, and I was kind of alone. So a lot of my identity when I first moved was trying to make connections because I was alone, and trying to say the right things, and trying to be social and make friends. As someone who isn't that social, it's a really tricky thing when you're someone who sort of likes to be by yourself, but also as a human, being completely alone is sort of painful and
Mm-hmm.
difficult to endure. So I'm sort of always balancing, at least at the time, I was balancing a lot of trying to say the right things, make connections, and not screw it up, but also at the same time being full of anxiety and all those things that sort of hold me back. And it was really exciting when I found people who could relate to a lot of the things that I could relate to, because moving across the country for the first time was definitely culture shock. And there were a lot of things that I was missing when I did move.
So let's talk about some of these characters inside of the game, because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of characters inside of this game. How did you keep that comedic tone so many times and still get that same familiar feel of multiple different characters while still feeling like you're still in universe, you're still in this really funny world?
I Not to be my own echo, but the real key here is that I'm writing from life experiences, and after about 30 years, I have a lot of them, and a lot of the characters in the game are based on people that I've met, and things that I've done. Uh, and I just, like I mentioned, I write as if I were in the shoes of the main character. So it's pretty, even though it got a little bit daunting at times, it was never difficult to write, because I was writing as myself. Uh, so yeah, I have visited many places, at least about 14 different states, and have just met a lot of different people who have different values and different personalities. So it while it took a long time, it wasn't necessarily difficult to write all those characters.
Gotcha. It does look effortless when you look at some of these funny situations that these NPC characters are in when they're interacting with the character Trist in the universe. It's very fun. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I want to get into the combat system inside of the game, because there are a lot of very specific mechanics that you put into this combat system. The first thing I want to talk about is just where you actually got the idea to do some of these combat things. I'm seeing and this is just me as a video game player, it looks very like Mega Man Battle Network. You're moving across the grid to attack this person or the enemy. Tell us more about influences here.
So I do hear the Mega Man Battle Network reference a lot, and while it's a game I have played, I've played a couple of them. That wasn't actually the inspiration at all. The main inspiration for the battle system actually came from Punch Out, which is a game that maybe people growing up with games now don't even know what it is. But basically, Punch Out is a boxing game where you basically have two buttons, and you're this little dude who's going against all these massive boxers, and you have two buttons at your disposal. but the game had a lot of depth, even though you were only using those 2 buttons and could only weave from left to right. So since my game was focused primarily on narrative, I wanted something that could be deep, but also not be overwhelming for the player. So I thought Punch-Out was a pretty good starting point. The main difference is that instead of moving in 2 directions, you can move in 4 directions, just to make it a little more interesting. But you're ultimately also using 2 buttons to defend yourself through all the battles throughout the course of the game, and also having an ultra attack button.
So I like that a lot. I want to talk a little bit more about another aspect of the combat system, which you actually kind of discussed a little bit earlier. Like you said, this game is very heavy narrative based. And in that, you actually brought something unique to the combat system called Smack Talk, which allows you to buff and debuff certain enemies and yourself before you actually go through fighting. Tell us a little bit more about the Smack Talk mechanic.
Smack Talk was just really something that the game was actually mostly finished when Smack Talk came along. I was thinking to myself, every RPG, many games in general have combat, and combat should always be enjoyable, because in a lot of these games you're doing a lot of it. So that is mostly a given that most developers want to provide to players, but I wanted to provide something that was going to maybe make people giggle a little bit when they saw it, like something that they just wouldn't expect. So that's when I came up with Smack Talk. Originally, I was thinking very early on that you could talk your way out of all of the battles, but scrap that idea. So it sort of came back around as Smack Talk, and it's just something that really just get people excited and more interested in the narrative and the lore, and to have combat be a little bit more than beat this guy down and keep it pushing.
I completely understand. It comes off as very organic as well. Now, tell me a little bit more about how you determined what type of buffs that you wanted to use for the Smack Talk mechanic.
So really it's based on one of the founding principles of the battle system was that it should in some way kind of feel like a real fight, which is why different things happen as the fight progresses. But for Smack Talk, it's sort of like, if you've ever been in a fight, I have been in a few. If you are intimidated before a fight, you'll be very nervous and sort of tripping over yourself and intimidated, whereas the person with the upper hand mentally will probably be more aggressive, and that sort of has a lot of weight a lot of times in the way a fight goes. So that sort of smack talk in the beginning just sort of influences who's going to be more aggressive when the battle starts. So that's how I sort of put that together. Whereas another element, the momentum system, sort of, which is, sorry if you were going to go over this, but a key system of the game is that when your opponent has sort of overexhausted themselves, they sort of get winded, and then you sort of get a turn to go in on them. So that's sort of kind of what happens when you see boxers fight. They have to go to their corners to catch their breath. But when you're fighting for a long time, you get winded. And I just sort of wanted to bring some kind of, even though it's just a pixel game, I wanted to bring like some kind of depth and reality to the combat system.
I personally really enjoyed it when I was going over the footage. I unfortunately didn't have an opportunity to play it yet, but I'm very excited to touch it when it does come to Switch early next 2021. I want to kind of change gears just a smidge back, and I like to go back to general gameplay inside of the game. As you stated before, this is a narrative-based RPG game. Now, there are two other games right now that are very, very common with especially people who have gamed very frequently and anywhere from the last 30 years to even just the last 5 years. And those two games would be Undertale and Earthbound, which I'm certain you're familiar with, and I'm certain you've had comparisons to them as well inside of this game. How do you feel Don't Give Up differs from those two games?
I think I have a lot of answers for this. But I think the main thing that jumps out to me is the scale of the game. Undertale is about a long-seated divide between monsters and humans, like that's major.
Yeah.
Not that Don't Give Up isn't major, but that's major in a different way than Don't Give Up is. And Earthbound is more about saving the world, from imminent destruction. Don't Give Up isn't really about that. It's more about a personal journey. And to me, that's very major. We all have struggles and we all want to be our best selves. And Don't Give Up is about finding a way to push on when you aren't able to be your best self, or your current self isn't the self that you want to be, which I think is major in its own right. And it's more relatable, in my opinion, more realistic. So I would say that's one of the huge differences from a narrative standpoint. But I will say one of the things that did inspire me to make this game was those games, of course, because it sort of inspired me to say, well, hey, I haven't been doing pixel art for like a decade, but these games are still shining because of their great stories, and Earthbound is still has a huge following today. And it inspired me and made me believe at a time where I was almost giving up on myself that I could make something of value, even if it wasn't necessarily the prettiest game on the block.
Now, I understand that this game was actually the very first game that you've been essentially able to create completely and release, but you've been working on games and created many works in projects for a very long time. Is that correct as well?
That is correct.
How do you feel that Don't Give Up helps you as a developer grow with your general feelings about how you feel about creating, how you feel about the entire process? Now that you've actually created a game and completed and finished it and have people that are actively playing it, how does that make you feel as a game developer?
It is an amazing feeling. I think I could if I spent my whole life making 100 demos, I don't think it would even come close to the feeling that I have from finishing not only my first game, but the game I wanted to make, and games that people have told me personally that they are grateful that I made. It's, for me, game dev can be a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's really the only thing I could say in my life right now that if I got to do it forever, I would be absolutely okay with that and be willing to do that right away. It really is an amazing feeling, and finishing my first game has mostly solidified the fact that all I want to do going forward is make complete projects. So yeah, I'm in the process of doing that now.
I wanna touch base a little bit more on some of the positive motifs that you put inside of the game, because I understand that, first of all, the scaling aspect is so incredibly important. Like you stated before, the idea that typically games like this have had the hero go through a whole heroic art, where they're journeying across several different areas of the world and helping to like cement this huge, large balance as almost like, I want to call it like an epic journey. You know what I mean? But you've taken this story and you've made it so much more relatable, so much more personable to the player. So I guess I want to understand how your personal positivity also helped you understand how this story was still cemented and helpful to everyday people.
Yeah, that's a great question. Originally, when I started making this game, the I don't want to give any spoilers, but it was supposed to be a lot more grim. And throughout like I said, I use this as an outlet, and it helped a lot for me to channel my energy in a positive, beneficial direction. So eventually I was able to write the story in a way that not only concludes in a satisfactory way for the player, but it still also syncs with what I was going through in life, because by the time I'd finished the game, things were going a lot better for me mentally and personally. So yeah, it's definitely, the story is just completely relatable to a huge chunk of my life that I went through, from the bad to the ups and downs. And it really is a testament that, like, whatever you're going through, you can do better. And every day. I don't want to. I'm trying not to throw spoilers out there.
Yeah, of course, of course.
The next day can always be better. Yeah, you can always do better than the next day, the next second, the next minute, the next hour. You can be better than you were before. So yeah, I think this game, that's pretty much the goal of the narrative in this game. So hopefully that does get across.
I did feel a lot of just general relatability, even to the scene that we have very close inside of the entry, where we have Tris, you know, trying to decide how they want to deal with speaking to Beck and how they want to deal with the remainder of their day by going to a party when they may not necessarily want to go, where they may not necessarily be comfortable. That was personally very relatable to me. So I completely understand everything that you're saying about keeping that positive outlook throughout of it. Because the entire time he's, you know, still struggling, both, it seems like both just in general in his life, because he's like eating ketchup, you know, like he goes over to the pizza place. Yeah, he poor. Look, eat the rich, but also eat your ketchup, you know. Like the gentleman is working to continue surviving, and I think that is the most relatable motif throughout the entirety of the story, is that he's just trying to get through his day, you know. I love that personally. One of the things I did also want to talk about is the different locations that you had, even just inside of this preliminary gameplay video that you provided for us. We see him go through his day. We see him go outside on his block. We see him go into a pizzeria. Like, where did you get inspiration from these days? Once again, did it come back to moments inside of your life that you remember in, or was there something else you were looking at?
So this hate to do this, but this actually was inspired by Earthbound. I really, in my experience, I am a huge RPG fan. Always have been since a kid, but I think it's heavily skewed towards fantasy lands or sci-fi. RPGs rarely fit in the modern template, or at least based on how many there are that are like fantasy, sci-fi, demonic, all that other stuff, interdimensional. I really feel like there aren't enough RPGs set in settings that we can relate to. I'm also from New York originally, so I really love my metro anything. I love cities. So it was a no-brainer that writing a game inspired by myself would take place in a city. But yeah, I just really love the idea and the uniqueness of placing long narrative, old school RPG type game in a modern setting. It's just, to me, it's just a wonderful combination that I wouldn't mind seeing more of.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about that specific point, the idea that we don't see a lot of RPGs specifically existing inside of the modern setting, and even more so that we don't see a lot of RPGs focusing on people of color or people that are of LGBT or people that are inside of the LGBTQ plus community. So I don't want to make any assumptions here, but is it fair to say that Tris is a person of color?
Tris is a person of color. Tris is also queer.
Okay.
This is not mentioned at any point, but I also don't necessarily think it needs to be mentioned. Also doesn't need to be mentioned that he's Black, but that you can obviously sort of pick up on. But yeah, he's a lot of things.
No,
but
normalize it, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of not a focus on the game at any point. But yeah, these are things that people may not have known about Tris.
I think in general, normalizing that conversation and just inside of RPGs, specifically, like we said, RPGs that are very heavily based upon games that didn't necessarily do that. You know, it's nice to see it represented in this format. I want to touch a little bit more on that specifically because I'd like to know your thoughts on how you helped to normalize the fact that he is a person of color, that he is queer inside of this universe that is already so abnormal from a number of other RPG games that exist inside of this genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just sort of does that unintentionally. Like, it is a game about a Black game developer who's struggling and who's a real person who has all the problems that all peoples of all skin colors and backgrounds have. No one's immune to having a bad day. No one's immune to being depressed. No one's immune to failing at. I'm sure just about everyone in the world has had something that they've really wanted at the time. It felt like more than anything else, and it didn't work out, and it was crushing. And for Tris, that's game dev. It's not working out. He's broke. He's not making any money off of it. And I think anyone can relate to that. And these are just things that I'm pulling from my experiences. And I would hope that the fact that I hope that the fact that he's Black does shed some light on like that we are all the same, but at the same time, I wish we lived in a world where that didn't need to maybe be a thing. But if it can, I'm glad that it does, and it's able to shed some awareness. But yeah, Tris is just trying to make it, and I think that's what we're all trying to do. And this is not a story that was, sat and thought of for weeks. I didn't have a team that helped me write it. I wrote it all myself. So yeah, these are just things that I've gone through as a person.
Mm-hmm. It's really empowering to hear you say that, especially in a time of that we're going through right now, very specifically. I mean, the reason we're in this interview format is because we're currently in the midst of a very preventable quarantine, so it's great to see that you're able to address situations and motifs that help us come closer together and help us understand each other more than dividing. You know what I mean? Like, it's really beautiful. I'd like to go ahead and just give you an opportunity to let us know where we can grab this game. I understand it's available right now on Steam, coming to Switch early 2021, but where can we follow the journey of it getting there?
Taco Pizza Cats on Twitter. It's pretty memorable. Taco Pizza Cats, and my personal is on there as well. Always down the chat and talk about the game. I love to do that, and just get it on Switch when it comes out. Yeah, if you want it, get it. I also, if I can get my act together, there should be a special anniversary bundle on Steam during the expo, because the anniversary of the game is September 16th. So yeah, look out for that if I get Steam to play friendly with me.
Hey, let's hope. Let's definitely hope. You heard it here, folks. If you go on over to the Steam page, you should be able to download it right now. Keep an eye out for grabbing it on Switch as of early 2021. Tristan, it was an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
Likewise.
And everybody, that's going to go ahead and do it for this interview, but stay tuned. We have so much more content, so many more things to discuss, and so many more fantastic games to play. We want to thank Xbox, Panic, and even Brace Yourself Games for making this event possible and by sponsoring us to give the voices to so many fantastic developers. I'm the Purple Sharpie. You can call me Sharpie, and we will be right back.